Wiggle, 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 wiggle. Oh, well, hello there. How are you? I hope you're doing absolutely excellent. This is me and Sophia here. She's a beauty, as always. Look at her being a cool, badass night lady, and look, she's a good stab. So, that's pretty cool, I think. And today I wanted to talk a little bit about how no matter how bad you are, God will still love you and still forgive you and give you a good deal of peace and things. And I thought that was a pretty neat little thing because I was thinking about it lately. It's like, there's a lot of people out there who really think that they've sinned too much or they're not good enough to uh, be spiritual people or to follow a spiritual path. Like some people are like, man, I just don't have what it takes to be, a monk or a Buddhist or a Hindu or a practicer or a follower of the gods or anything like that. Sometimes they think, what if the giant crab comes for me? The giant crab of judgment. I mean, look at his judgmental eyes, even though his eyes are not actually judgmental, because he is a beautiful crab. Actually, I think it's a she. Wait, let's see. There's a way to tell, but it doesn't have eggs, so it's not. There's another way to tell, but I don't know what it is. Anyway, so I wanted to talk about a couple of figures that I think are very interesting and kind of portray this point rather well. We're gonna talk about some figures like Angulimala, Girish Ghosh, Swami Vivekananda a little bit, although he's less bad. You'll see when we get to him. Saint Paul and Saint Moses the Abyssinian. Saint Moses the Ethiopian. Same dude, sometimes known as Saint Moses the Black. But we're going to get into all of them, but we're going to start with Angulimala here. Because Angulimala is one that I always think of as like a very good example of this. So Angulimala is someone from the time of the Buddha. And in case you don't know, Angulimala literally means garland of fingers. Basically, this guy was a bandit who lived in the woods, or lived in a section of woods, and people were always really scared of him, and he would kill people and take their fingers and put them on their garland of fingers. And, the Buddha was going to travel through these woods, and everyone was like, no, Buddha, don't go that way. Oh my God, scary, stab. And, well, they weren't like stab, I was like stab. But anyway, and it's interesting here, and I have some notes here. So, in the textual sources, two texts in the Pali Canon concern themselves with Angulimala's initial encounter with the Buddha and his conversion. The first is the Therigatha, verses 866 through 91, and the second is Angulimala Sutta in the Majjhima Nikaya. Both offer a fairly short description of Angulimala's encounter with the Buddha and omit much of the background information later incorporated into the story, such as Angulimala being placed under an oath by a jealous teacher. These later additions, which appear in the Sutta commentaries attributed to Buddhaghosa and Dhammapala, may represent attempts by later commentators to rehabilitate the character of Angulimala, making him appear as a fundamentally good human being entrapped by circumstance rather than as a vicious killer. The Sutta texts themselves do not provide for any motive for Angulimala's actions other than pure sadism. Now, I will say that this is kind of interesting. So basically, in the tellings of the story, in later editions of the story, well, all right then. In later editions of the story, people were basically trying to give excuses for why Angulimala was, killing people and taking their fingers in necklaces, and they were trying to make him seem like he's a cooler guy. I personally actually like the version where and I think this goes closer to the actual original textual sources, which say that he was just a sadist, just straight up a sadist, because that makes it seem to me that, so that means that a sadist can actually, be turned around and be given, a new life. So, and He has some early stuff in here, but like most of it is added later on. And so here we're gonna get to the part where he meets the Buddha. Villagers petitioned the king of Kosala, who vowed to hunt down Angulimala. Fearing for her son's life, Angulimala's mother set out to find him and warn him of the king's intent. The Buddha perceived this with his divine eye, faculty of clairvoyance, that Angulimala had slain 999 victims and was desperately seeking 1,000th. If the Buddha encountered Angulimala that day, he would become a monk and subsequently attain nirvana. If Angulimala encountered his mother instead, he would slay her as his 1,000th victim and fall into hell for millennia as a matricide. I do find this very funny. He kills 999 people, and the idea is, well, if he kills his mom, that's worse than any of the other ones. And it's like, I mean, I guess he's already killed 999 people. I mean, it's just, is adding one more if it's his mom really that big of a difference? I mean, once again, I guess in ancient India, yes, it was a huge deal to kill your mother or father or whatever, but like still, I find that kind of funny. The Buddha set off to intercept Angulimala despite being warned by the people of the village in which he was staying. On the road through the forest of Kosala, Angulimala first saw his mother, who came to warn him of impending arrival of the king's army. Angulimala, after some deliberation, decided to make her 1,000th victim. But then when the Buddha also arrived, he chose to kill him instead. He drew his sword and started running towards the Buddha, but although Angulimala was running as fast as he couldn't catch up with the Buddha, who was walking calmly. The Blessed One had willed a feat of psychic power such that Angulimala, though running with all his might, could not catch up with the Blessed One walking at a normal pace. The bewildered Angulimala so much This bewildered Angulimala so much that he called to the Buddha to stop. The Buddha said that he had already stopped, and that it was Angulimala who should stop. Angulimala asked for further explanation, after which the Buddha said that he had stopped harming living beings and that Angulimala was still harming and hurting living beings. After hearing this, Angulimala changed his ways, vowed to cease his life as a brigand, and join the Buddhist order. They may be saying, now wait a minute, so he just has this weird thing happen, is like, okay, I'm going to completely turn my life around. Well, yes. Sometimes it just takes like one person showing that you're doing the wrong thing and like really turning things around for you. Now that's not always the case, but the Buddha is also big magic man, so we have to appreciate big magic man. Later, King Pasandi, king of Kosala, set out to find and kill Angulimala. He stopped first to pay a visit to the Buddha and his followers at the monastery where they dwelled. He explained to the Buddha his purpose, and the Buddha asked how the king would respond if he discovered that Angulimala had given up the life of a highwayman and became a monk. The king said that he would salute him and offer to provide for him in a monastic vocation. The Buddha then revealed that Angulimala sat only a few feet away, his hair and beard shaven off, a member of the Buddhist order. The king, astounded, offered to donate robe materials to Angulimala and then returned to his palace. Later, Angulimala came across a young woman undergoing a difficult labor. He went to the Buddha and asked him what he could do to ease her pain. The Buddha told Angulimala to go to the woman and say, "Sister, since I was born, I do not recall intentionally killing a living being. Through this truth, may there be well-being for you, and well-being for your fetus." Angulimala pointed out that this would be untrue for him to say this. The Buddha offered him the revised stanza: "Sister, since I was born with noble birth, became a monk, I do not recall intentionally killing a living being. Through this truth, may there be well-being for you and well-being for your fetus." The Buddha was making a wordplay here on the word born to support Angulimala, who was suffering from severe remorse, which was badly obstructing his meditation, of his renewed commitment to the existence, becoming a monk. After Angulimala delivered this benediction, the woman safely gave birth to her child. The verse commonly called the Angulimala Parita continues to be recited at the blessing of Hazrat the pregnant woman in Theravada countries. This helped Angulimala focus his mind on his basic meditation subject. Before, there would always appear in his mind either the place, the jungles, where he had slain so many people. After performing the act of truth, he was seen to bring safety to people, and people started to approach him and provide him with alms food. At last, his earlier name ahimsaka fully befitted him. Most of the people had gained full confidence in his inner transformation, and there was no lack of support for him. However, a resentful few could not forget that he was responsible for the deaths of their loved ones. Unable to win revenge through the law, they took matters into their own hands. With sticks and stones, they attacked him as he walked for alms. With a bleeding head, torn out of a robe, and a broken alms bowl, Angulimala managed to return to the monastery. The Buddha encouraged Angulimala to bear his torment with equanimity. He indicated that Angulimala was experiencing the fruits of karma that would otherwise have condemned him to hell. This illustrates the Buddhist belief that while the effects of karma are inescapable, the form that they take and the schedule in which they occur can be modified by later action. In this case, Angulimala. I have to flip the page. I like how as I'm talking about this, there's just a big tentacle monster in the background. Hi, tentacle monster. How are you doing? Experienced physical suffering during the course of his last life, rather than experience torment in another birth for much longer period of time. Being an arahant, Angulimala remained firm and invulnerable in mind and heart, but his body, the symbol and fruit of fruits karma, was exposed to the effects of his former evil deeds. As an arahant, he needed no words of consolation, but a reminder of the karmic continuation of cause and effect, which still has to be endured until the end. When he entered Savatthi for alms, he was attacked by a mob, but on admonition of the Buddha, endured their wrath and penance for his former misdeeds. According to the Dhammapada, I probably said that wrong. He appears to have died soon after he joined the order. So basically, he joins the order, and after he does all this, he ends up actually becoming an arahant and ends up living his last life because he gains enlightenment, because he was able to turn himself around. And even though people weren't all forgiving him and some were even attacking him still, he was able to hold true to his new Buddhist ethics, and he managed to not harm anybody, even though people were attacking him. So hey, that's a really big turnaround. He turned from evil ground dirt to big ground flower, and that's really good. And just one example of like a very extreme example, in fact, of how people who were living terrible lives can abandon their former terrible lives and become, spiritual beings and spiritual seekers. Another example of this is one of my favorites, Girish Ghosh. Girish Ghosh was a Bengali theater guy. He wrote plays, he wrote songs, he directed plays, he did all kinds of stuff, and he was very well renowned in Bengal at the time. And this was during the time of Ramakrishna. And at first, when he would often like do these plays that were very like kind of Vaishnava focused. So like, and if you don't know what Vaishnavism is, that's like the group of Hindus that worship like Vishnu as the primary incarnation of God, or the primary form of God. And he was always doing these really holy plays, but then people would come up to him, and he was kind of a drunkard, so they would come up to him, and then afterwards they would say, oh, this must be a really holy person directing this play. But then they would meet him, and it was a guy who was always drinking and things like that. But Girish Ghosh would eventually meet Ramakrishna, and Ramakrishna would say that there's actually a good heart and soul inside of Girish Ghosh, and Girish Ghosh would end up becoming a disciple of Ramakrishna, and he would become one of the most fervent lovers and worshippers of Ramakrishna during his life. He would go from basically being, a horrible drunkard and braggart and all kinds of things like that to being one of the best supporters of the Ramakrishna mission, and he's very famous for this. He basically completely turned his life around, and although he would occasionally still drink and still get drunk and things like that, he became fully dedicated to Ramakrishna, and I personally find this guy rather inspiring. And let's see, I think I have notes here on some of the actual... There's some events. His career stuff. Ah, here we go. Girish first met Ramakrishna in his ancestral home. In the ancestral home of his neighbor. On the 21st of September, 1884, Sri Ramakrishna went to watch the Chinya Leela in the Star Theater. It is said that Girish's first meeting with Sri Ramakrishna was not very cordial. He saw Sri Ramakrishna in divine ecstasy and thought it to be some kind of trick. But later, when Ramakrishna met him, the master told him the incident was no trick, and Girish was extremely surprised to find the master reading his thoughts. Later, when the master went to visit the theater, he and Girish repeatedly went on exchanging salutes, and ultimately Girish had to give up. Girish later said, oh yeah, because apparently Girish would bow, and then Ramakrishna would bow, and then they would bow further and further and further, and eventually Ramakrishna was bowing like so lowly, he's like, okay, I'm not going to try and beat Ramakrishna at bowing. Girish later said about this incident that in the Iron Age, the best weapon is the salute weapon with which God kills his enemies. In his play Nasiram, Girish used much of the teachings of Sri Ramakrishna. There are many scenes in the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna involving Girish and Sri Ramakrishna. Sri Ramakrishna went to watch several of his plays in the Star Theater. He blessed Binodini Dase, one of the lead actresses. Many of the followers of Sri Ramakrishna were shocked that Girish was held in such high regard by the master. Girish was known to visit houses of prostitution, falling down drunk, and even cursed Sri Ramakrishna. Yet he came to regard Ramakrishna as an avatar. So think about that. This guy is still living his, supposedly immoral and impure life. He's still visiting houses of prostitution. He's still falling down drunk and all these things, but he still loves Ramakrishna and he still worships Ramakrishna and thinks Ramakrishna is an avatar. Just because sometimes we do sinful things, or even sometimes we have a character that seems to keep bringing us to sinful or maybe things that we would consider to be bad activities, it doesn't mean that we're forsaken by God. And even though he did all these things, Sri Ramakrishna still saw him very highly and still loved him. He was still worthy of the respect of the master, and he still loves him. And here's another thing here. After testing Sri Ramakrishna for years, seeking to find a fault or hypocrisy, but finding none, Girish finally asked what spiritual practices to adopt. Ramakrishna answered, try and call on God 3 times a day. Girish says, I'm sorry, I can't promise to. I may forget. Then the master said, do it twice a day. Do it once. Girish, in dismay, no, I can't promise anything. Finally, Ramakrishna says, all right, then give me your power of attorney. I'll be responsible for you. Now you have no will at all. You only say, I do whatever the Lord wills. Don't ever say again, I will do this or I will do that. At first he felt relieved, thinking he could go on doing whatever he liked. But slowly he came to realize that he had to be honest with himself and ask, is this something God wants me to do or just my lower nature? So he gives himself over to Ramakrishna. And you gotta think about this. Like, this is someone whose life was in many ways very what we would consider sinful, but he gave himself over to Ramakrishna, and that slowly but surely, giving your will over to the divine can help you benefit tremendously by saying, just doing little things to try and gain God's approval and gain God's love. And God already loves you, but trying to show your love to God and trying to give yourself over to the divine is very helpful. And Swami Vivekananda is kind of funny too, because although Swami Vivekananda was nowhere near as um, sinful as Girish Ghosh, Swami Vivekananda had a lot of arrogance in his heart, and when he first, met Sri Ramakrishna, he thought, "Oh, this is crazy," and all this other stuff. But you have events like where Swami Vivekananda uh, first encounters, or it's not when he first encounters Ramakrishna, but he says that he thinks that the idea of God being like within everything is ridiculous, and he says this to Ramakrishna, and then Ramakrishna touches him, and he sees that God is literally within everything. I mean, you can be arrogant, you can be rude, you can be all kinds of things, but God is still loving, and God is still willing to listen to you, and still willing to do things for you, And that's the beauty of it. God is ever graceful, ever wondrous, ever mystical, ever magical, ever forgiving. And you got to think another figure I was going to talk about here is Saint Paul. Saint Paul was someone who was persecuting Christians and persecuting people who called Jesus Christ Lord. He was persecuting people who were uh, saying that they were followers of Jesus Christ, and he was this really devout Pharisee. And then he has this encounter with Jesus on the road to Damascus, and this encounter completely changes him. He completely turns around. Think about it. Think about someone who goes from persecuting the people, the followers of the Lord, someone who was, abusing and hurting people because for his own tradition's sake and a variety of other reasons, probably some negativity in his heart and things like that, right? And then he goes through and has this full conversion process and ends up becoming one of the most fervent preachers of the Lord, and someone who is always, calling upon Jesus Christ and is always calling upon us to, be better and to, remember and thank our brothers and sisters in the church and things like that. And you got to think about like how kind of crazy that is. Like you would think if the Lord was going to choose an instrument to strengthen his church, you wouldn't think it would be someone who was persecuting them. But in a weird way, it makes perfect sense. And he chose this guy because he saw something in him that none of us did. That's another thing that you got to remember. A lot of people who we judge and think that there's a lot of stuff wrong with them, the Lord has their way with them. The Lord will change them and benefit them and protect them, and the Lord moves in whom she will. She has her favorites. She has people that she loves. She loves everybody, but she has people that she behaves and reacts with differently. And there's things that we can learn from this if we're willing to listen and be patient and learn and think about all of the different things involved there. And you never know what someone's going through, or better yet, you never know what the Lord has put into someone's heart. So you should always try to remain open and always try to be loving and listen to people's troubles. And the last figure I was going to talk about in this was going to be Saint Moses the Abyssinian. He was a man who was a robber and a thief, and he was trying to escape from getting caught. Or actually, here I think was it him getting caught? Let's see. Sorry, I have a lot of notes here. Moses was a slave of a government official in Egypt until he was dismissed for theft and suspected murder. He roamed the Nile Valley with an infamous and violent gang of 75 robbers. Moses was a man of huge physical stature, strength, and courage, and became a leader of this gang of robbers that became a social menace and a living terror to the communities where they roamed. On one occasion, a barking dog prevented Moses from carrying out a robbery, so he swore vengeance on the owner. In his second attempt, with a sword in his mouth, Moses swam across the Nile towards the owner's hut. The owner, again alerted, was able to hide, and the frustrated Moses stole 4 of his sheep and took them to slaughter, selling the fleece in exchange for wine. Attempting to hide from the local authorities, he took shelter with some monks in a colony in the desert. of Wadi el Natron, then called Sectes near Alexandria. The dedication of their lives as well as their peace and contentment influenced Moses deeply. He soon gave up his own way of life, became a Christian, and was baptized and joined the monastic community there. And here's a little bit about his monastic life. Moses had a rather difficult time adjusting to regular monastic discipline. His flair for adventure remained with him. Attacked by a large group of robbers in the desert cell, Moses fought back, overpowered the intruders, and dragged them to the chapel where the other monks were at prayer. He told his brothers that he did not think it was Christian to hurt the robbers and asked what he should do with them. The robbers themselves repented and enjoyed the community as brothers afterwards. Moses was zealous in all he did, but became discouraged when he concluded that he was not perfect enough. Feeling overcome by despair and once again tempted by his former passions, early one morning, Isidore, abbot of the monastery, took Moses to the roof. Together they watched the first rays of dawn come over the horizon. And Isidore said to Moses, "Only slowly do the rays of the sun drive away the night and usher in a new day, and thus only slowly does one become a perfect contemplative." Moses proved to be effective as a prophetic spiritual leader. The abbot ordered brothers to fast during a particular week. Some brothers came to Moses, and he prepared a meal for them. Neighboring monks reported to the abbot Moses was breaking the fast. When they came to confront Moses, they changed one, saying, "You did not keep a human commandment, but it was so that you might keep the divine commandment of hospitality." Some see in his account one of the earliest allusions to the Paschal fast, which developed at this time. When a brother committed a fault and Moses was invited to a meeting to discuss an appropriate penance, Moses refused to attend. When he was again called to the meeting, Moses took a leaking jug, filled the water, and carried it on his shoulder. Another version of the story was him carrying a basket filled with sand. When he arrived at the meeting place, they asked why he was carrying the jug. He replied, "My sins run out behind me, and I do not see them. But today I am coming to judge the errors of another." On hearing this, the assembled monk brother forgave the erring monk. At about age 75, word came that a group of Berbers planned an attack on the monastery. The brothers wanted to defend themselves, but Moses forbade it. He told them to retreat rather than take up weapons, citing that a violent death was appropriate for the former robber. All who take the sword will perish by the sword. He opted to remain behind. He was joined by 7 others, and together they were martyred by the bandits. So, this man, who had a lot of sin in his heart and had a lot of trouble, he was comforted by Christ, and he was comforted by his fellow brothers, and he learned how to think about sin, and he learned how to overcome sin, and how to stop not judging not only himself, but stop judging others. You got to think about it, man. People like this are great examples of the peace and serenity that can come from the monastic way of life. We shouldn't, strive to be perfect, but we should strive to always be doing better. And we should always remember these examples. People like Girish Ghosh, like Moses, like Moses the Abyssinian, like Angulimala. All these people, they did not start as perfect adherents, but they came and they became great adherents. People like St. Paul was a persecutor of Christians and then became one of the most important people in the beginning of the church. We got to think about these kind of people and remember that, there is a lot of things that we've probably messed up on, and there are times that we've messed up in life, but God is always willing to forgive us, and there's always a chance that we can recover and be blessed by spiritual life again. It's not a matter of simply being good once and for all It's a matter of being good and always trying to remember forgiveness and trying to come back and be better than we were before. And I think that's very important, and that we should always remember that sort of thing. We should always remember that there's always time for us to become better and to contemplate God and to be one with the spiritual life. And we should always remember, too, that once again, we don't know what's in the heart of other people and we don't know what struggles they're going through. So you should remember these things and remember that God is always willing to forgive you and you always have a place with God. Okay? I think that's an important message for everyone to get across. I hope you enjoyed learning about these various different figures, and I hope that they will inspire you to remember that you don't have to be perfect and that God will still love you. Okay? Anyway, I hope that you all have a God-blessed day and that you all remember the Divine Mother and always remember your friends and your family and always say a prayer for everybody around you. Remember, we're all in this together. Okay, thanks. Bye-bye.